Going to be a bit of a redo for you guys if you've seen me a few streams ago, because my previous coverage of the Facebook whistleblower actually got demonetized because I had the brilliant idea to watch like 8 minutes of 60 minutes footage on YouTube, thinking that it wouldn't be content ID claimed, somehow. I don't know how I thought that works, but I want to talk about this really quick because A, it deserves to be on the YouTube channel. And B, I think it's important to cultivate my thoughts a bit because the last segment on this did have about an hour dedicated to talking about gambling. I don't know what that had to do with the rest of the thing, but yeah. So yeah, we're going to correct. This was in need of correction anyway, a little more expedient. But basically, a woman who worked for Facebook has done a whistleblowing. How cool is that? Whistleblower. Facebook is misleading the public on progress against hate speech, violence, and misinformation. Frances Haugen said in her time with Facebook she saw conflicts of interest between what was good for the public and what was good for Facebook. Scott Pelley reports. So there are a couple of controversial topics that come up time and time again on my stream, and one of them is regulation and censorship of social media. Now, I'm going to lay out my arguments as clearly and cleanly as I can, okay? I think that legislation can be justified if it has positive outcomes on the world. Now, I think there are some regulations you can make on social media that would lead to very positive changes to the world. The question that people often posit in response is, what happens if the implementation of that change enables future and worse changes? You understand what I mean? So say you enable, like, okay, you can regulate social media and you can enforce this TOS. Well, what if the Republicans take power and they enforce a TOS that you can't say that you're gay or whatever? So there's an element of this that I think is a slippery slope argument, and there's an element of it that I think is legitimate. So here are a few things that I believe. First of all, when fascists take power, and I am unapologetic in describing the modern Republican Party as fascist, the only thing that's stopping them is the thin veneer of democratic respectability and a few ailing infrastructural, democratic principles that are failing every single time they get pushed on. But with all of that said, if a fascist group takes power, I do not think they will withhold from exercising it to its fullest extent because a previous liberal party didn't implement a law. Like, if the fascists really wanted to do some 1984 anti-free speech stuff, I feel like they would just do it with whatever power they had. I feel like they wouldn't then, like, go, oh, well, we can't do this because the previous legislation didn't give us the right to do this, It's just about constructing laws that can't be used for like really weird, nefarious, slippery slope purposes. So imagine there's a law and it's like the 2023 Congressional Social Media Regulation Act, right? Let's say that's a thing. That's a thing that gets passed. Let's say that's a cool thing that happens, okay? Now, depending on the wording of that law, that could be used for great abuse in the future, or potentially not. So here's a way that it can be. Here's a way to structure it that doesn't leave much room for abuse. Okay, what about this, guys? Social media platforms must make an effort, a good faith effort, because that's often how regulation in social media goes, to control the propagation of harassment against people based on protected classes. In that case, you're hinging the legislation to protected classes, which means that there's a stronger, sturdier foundation that you can sort of rely on as a way of mitigating the potential effect of that law downstream. So protected classes in the US refer to like race, sex, nationality, religion, something like that. Now, that's just a spitball there. I do still want to be able to make fun of Italian people. I am not saying that we should implement that. I'm only saying that's the type of legislation that would not potentially snowball really, really far down into like total 1984 stuff. Now, potentially you could have a law that's passed in Congress that goes, you may, First Amendment doesn't apply at all. You can regulate whatever you want when it comes to website TOS, and that could be abused in the future. Just remember that the argument, what if bad people take power and abuse this law, is good but incomplete. You understand? It's a good counterargument, but it's not the end all be all. There are ways to mitigate it. After all, the existence of laws in general fit that description perfectly. What's the difference between locking up murderers and locking up trans people? After all, it's really just what the people in power decide should and should not be illegal, right? I mean, at the end of the day, any system where one group has power over another, in this case, the government over all of us, is one in which the is one in which the potential for harm exists that is not analogous. It's perfectly analogous. Literally, law is essentially legislated morality, even if it's a couple tiers down, right? With regards to how laws are implemented and which people get punished for what, it really is just up to what the people in power decide. Obviously, we have, constitutional guarantees, but with enough people with enough power, they could override those as well. And hey, if they wanted to, they could just break the law. Guys, how many times has the US government violated fundamental premises of our Bill of Rights? Guys, if they have enough power, yeah, it's when bad people get in power, there's only so much limitations can do. The limitations help, but it can only help so much. So the only thing that I'm saying here is the argument that, what would be done next, you can't prepare for the worst people in power using this law. Good argument, but incomplete, you know? Because if the bad people have enough power, what's happened before will mean nothing, When the Nazi Party took over Germany, the laws that the Weimar Republic had passed had nothing to do with what they got to do next. It's not like it was a template they could follow or anything like that. Once they were in power, they just cracked their knuckles and they were like, you know what, we're just gonna do, honestly, whatever the fuck we feel like. We don't care. And, that was bad. So maybe we should focus more on preventing the bad people from getting into power, because that way we don't have to worry about them abusing these systems, right? It seems like the best defense isn't building systems which can never be abused by very bad people in power, because I don't know if that's even possible. The best defense is to prevent the bad people from ever getting into power, and that is what we're going to talk about here. Essentially, the whistleblower said that Facebook is fully aware that it propagates a tremendous amount of harassment and misinformation, and that it chooses to enable and allow for this with very minimal oversight, because it is the content driver on their platform. It is the discourse that facilitates the greatest stock value for their corporation. That's really it at the end of the day. Francis Hogan is 37, a data scientist from Iowa with a degree in computer engineering and a Harvard master's degree in business. Very, very talented, intelligent, no doubt, I assume. But anyway, she worked for Facebook for a time, and she copied tens of thousands of pages of Facebook internal research. This is based as hell, by the way. Thank you very, very much. Evidence shows, according to her, that the company is lying to the public about making significant progress against hate, violence, and misinformation. One study she found from this year said, quote, "We estimate we may action as little as 3 to 5% of hate and about 0.6% of 1% of violence and incitement on Facebook, despite being the best in the world at it." 0.6% of 1%. 0.6% of a single percent, which is unbelievable. To quote from another one of the documents brought out, quote, "We have evidence from a variety of sources." Yes, 0.6%. I just followed the verbiage of the article, but I agree. It should have just said 0.6%. A variety of sources say that hate speech, divisive political speech, and misinformation on Facebook and the family of apps are affecting societies around the world, meaning that Facebook's algorithms, the way they prioritize and curate information, are affecting the real world. Now, that should not be surprising to any of you guys, I got Biden elected, but a lot of people don't seem to understand that the way in which Facebook is run can have very, very real impacts on the world we live in a very immediate way. This woman worked for the civic integrity branch, I believe. She was assigned to civic integrity, which worked on risks to the election, including misinformation. So this civic integrity branch was empowered when Facebook enabled some anti-disinfo protocols leading up to the 2020 election. Then they disabled it after the election. It seems like Facebook's brief effort at cutting down on disinfo was only an attempt to avoid legislation being targeted against it. If it seemed as though they were doing nothing at all, then they might open themselves up to severe public and political backlash. But if they did a little something, then maybe that gets avoided for some time. So anyway, it gets scarier than that if you can actually believe it. So um, I'm trying to find the exact. Oh yeah, man, this is wild. Here's what she says. Facebook essentially amplifies the worst of human nature, said the interviewer. Francis says, it's one of those unfortunate consequences, right? No one at Facebook is malevolent, but the incentives are misaligned, right? Remember, it's all about incentive structures. Like, Facebook makes more money when you consume more content. People enjoy engaging with things that elicit an emotional reaction. And the more anger they get exposed to, the more they interact and the more they consume. That dynamic led to a complaint to Facebook by major political parties across Europe. This 2019 internal report obtained by Haugen said the parties, quote, feel strongly that the change to the algorithm has forced them to skew negative in their communications on Facebook, leading them to more extreme policy positions. The European political parties were essentially saying to Facebook, the way you've written your algorithm is changing the way we lead our countries. You're forcing us to take positions we don't like, that we know are bad for society. We know if we don't take those positions, we won't win in the marketplace of social ideas. So, people often say that the free propagation of information, the marketplace of ideas, allows us to decide which ideas are the best. The free discussion, the sunlight of open discourse, allow us to determine what we should believe. Now, unfortunately, this is contradicted by all available evidence. Unfortunately, popularity and truth value do not always intersect. In fact, they often don't. And when you have social media websites which prioritize sensationalism, dogmatism, and misinformation, as Facebook very explicitly does, you are essentially skewing an already biased free marketplace of ideas towards the worst ideas humanly imaginable, like QAnon, like Alex Jones tier shit. We're not just advocating for the free market of ideas. We're advocating for a market which is designed to propagate bad ideas. This goes beyond human beings aren't naturally good at deciding what is or isn't true in big public settings. This goes beyond that. This goes all the way over to the setting that we have built is forcing right-wing European political parties to become more right-wing than they want to be because their constituencies are outpacing them with the crazy conspiracy disinfo they're consuming because it incentivizes it. The politicians are incentivized to say what they know will be voted for, and the people on these platforms, the people who run them, are incentivized to maintain an algorithm that promotes disinformation. Guys, democracy can't survive this. Remember when I said at the beginning of this that maybe our first priority should be preventing the bad people from getting in power? That's the best way of preventing laws from being used to hurt us, by making sure that good representatives with good values get put into power. Facebook is guaranteeing the bad people get into power. Facebook is one of those institutions whose existence makes the world worse, not just because the platform is bad, but because it shapes the world around it objectively towards conservative outcomes, which is bad. Or to put it another way, I think that regulation of social media, particularly Facebook, is more pro-freedom than letting them do whatever they want. Now, what are those regulations going to be exactly? I don't know. That's something I want to do a research stream on. I want to learn more about it. But the position that we're in right now is the people who are arguing in favor of free, unregulated speech are the people who, if given power, would immediately remove it. Why are the loudest advocates for free speech the only people who don't believe in it? Liberals believe in free speech. Not perfect, but they do. Leftists, if they're not tankies, tend to believe in free speech. Fascists don't. And yet they are the loudest people when it comes to defending the supposed sacrosanct nature, of social media platforms unregulated. It's because they know they're winning through those platforms. They know they're not free speech. They're aware of that. But they know that by abusing sacrosanct, is that not I'll look up the word after I'm done rambling. They prioritize their free speech more than anything else. So we need to be careful to not just reflect it's sacrosanct. Okay, thank you. We need to be careful to not just reflect the dogmatism promoted by people who are abusing our current laissez-faire attitude towards social media regulation to make the world more authoritarian. You understand? The anti-authoritarian measure at any point in time in all societies is what? The measure that prevents authoritarianism. It is as simple as that. In the same way that making murder illegal is an imposition on your pre-existing freedom to murder people, it nonetheless makes the world more free by preserving the bodily autonomy of others. And so too is the case with Facebook. If the government regulates TOS on Facebook, there are good and bad ways they could do it, that's for sure. It's very, very complicated. One thing is for sure, though. A good regulation, a good implementation could cut down on what is currently the biggest platform for the spread of conservative and fascist disinformation. And that right there is anti-authoritarianism. There is nothing anti-authoritarian about smiling and nodding as fascists take over your government because you're too afraid to do anything about it. That's not anti-authoritarian. You're just buying into their propaganda. Like the fascist slithers up to you and says, "Listen up, liberal. Actually, the best way to fight fascism is to do nothing to stop us from spreading misinformation. Do nothing about the huge, massive global social media companies that control data from billions of people that specifically prioritize our information. Do not listen to them. If you want to have a conversation on these issues, you have to do it meaningfully and in good faith, but you have to just, who decides misinfo? Cool Kid 7, the answer to any question you're going to answer is either legislators or the courts. That's another argument that I really don't like, by the way. You want to change a thing? Who will decide what the thing to be changed is and how you will change it? Legislators and the courts. Same as everything else in society. Same as everything else we've ever done at any point. Yeah, same as we solved this problem like millennia ago. We have mechanisms for it. Now, there are good and bad ways of doing it. Again, I'm not saying any attack on this is a good way of handling it. But guys, this shit cannot continue to happen, okay? Far-right political parties moving further to the right because Facebook is prioritizing an algorithm that is making them fucking QAnoners. This is not a sustainable system, okay? We can't do this. We cannot do this. We will literally die. We will all die of something eventually, but we will die sooner than that and less happy, okay? We will die. We cannot do it, okay? Why don't I see a lot of Nazis on Twitter? Twitter is predominantly a left-leaning platform in terms of the proportions of people's interest, likes, and retweets. And one of the reasons for that is because Twitter is nowhere near as much of an echo chamber. Seriously. The echo chamber that you produce on Twitter is nothing compared to what you can do on Facebook. Facebook is wild with the echo chambers that you can form. But with Twitter, you sure, Vosh? Yes. In Facebook, you create private pages, invite only. On Twitter, anytime someone with a big account finds you, they can just quote tweet you and get 30,000 likes dunking on you. That happens literally every day. Have you ever scrolled Twitter? Every single day, somebody with a bad take gets quote tweeted by an account, and gets obliterated into like their account being they get annihilated. Take a look at the demographics on Twitter in terms of like political affiliations. There are not like the same kinds of gigantic QAnon circles on Twitter. And a lot of that is also because Twitter actually fucking moderates its platform. Twitter does. There are big ban waves on Twitter. How does Reddit compare to that? Reddit, bad as it is, does occasionally do big ban waves on far-right subreddits. They actually do listen sometimes when it comes to subreddits that propagate a ton of misinformation or subreddits that do a bunch of violence posting. I mean, Twitter is still an echo chamber. They're all echo chambers to some extent, but some are far worse than others. And guys, if you guys have ever like used Facebook, you know that's the worst of them, right? You have to know that, right? Facebook is far and away, overwhelmingly more capable of being an echo chamber. Yeah, and Twitter does have ban waves. Reddit has ban waves. Discord is worse. Discord's not the same. I don't think Discord's the same with how it operates. It is social media, but it's not. I don't think it. I don't think it's like the same type of thing as like a Facebook or a Twitter or whatever. What about Twitch and YouTube? Well, those are also different because Twitch and YouTube social media is gatekept behind platforms where you produce content. Whereas on Twitter or Facebook, you can just post, you know? On YouTube, YouTube has had problems making echo chambers in the past with how their algorithms recommend certain types of political leanings in their videos. For what it's worth, the comments on your Facebook page are the worst compared to other socials. Lol. Gotcha, Tempest, and not surprising to me. Um, and as for Twitch, I mean, what is I don't even know what a Twitch echo chamber is. I don't even know what channels are ranked by how many views they have. I mean, what maybe you can have like a gamer echo chamber. It's yeah, it's not. I don't know. Hassan, an echo chamber isn't just you find one content creator you like and listen to. An echo chamber is where there's an entire branching space of media and content creators, of platforms, forums, and posts that are all in ideological lockstep with no capability of being breached. Twitter, that echo chamber can be obliterated at any point in time by a quote tweet, or by a brigade, unless everyone is like on private, in which case nobody's seeing anything anyway, because big accounts never go private on Twitter and like actually have communication or discourse there because it's considered anti-growth, whereas on Facebook it doesn't work that way. You understand what I mean? Do we all understand what I mean? Maybe the government needs to enforce some types of TOS. Maybe the government needs to enforce some kind of ban waves corresponding to existing TOS. Maybe the government just needs to structure the way algorithms are structured so that it's not possible for Facebook to construct the echo chambers that it has. Maybe none of those is the solution, you know? Yeah, maybe there should be like more legislative solutions, possibly. Something needs to be done because I refuse to live in a dead world, which is dead because people were afraid to regulate Facebook. I'm sorry, guys. There are a lot of apocalypse futures, and that is the one I am not living in. Not in a million years. Absolutely no way, no how. That is not the one that I am running down, okay? Can we talk about the conservatives attacking the Facebook whistleblower? I think it's very, very interesting that conservatives are attacking this whistleblower when nothing in her interview actually mentions conservatism. She mentions disinformation, hate, violence, and harassment. She never actually mentions conservatives. 0 hits. And I saw the video too. So if the right has a problem with her, it's because they're interested in maintaining the existence of all these things. It's a self-report. A woman comes out and says, hey, there's a lot of hate, misinformation, and threats of violence. And conservatives are like, oh, she's talking about us. Oh, she's talking about us, isn't she? All right.